Welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon. For me, it is 8:30 a.m. here in Boulder, Colorado, where I am calling from. And I'm very excited about today's webinar, Designing for Circularity. We're going to be talking about the waste hierarchy in PET. And I see people are joining, which is awesome. We got our on-time crew here. There should be a poll that just popped up on screen. So this is a little warm-up for our brains this morning before we really get started. So please take a second to answer, how is your business, or how open is your business to exploring or adopting reuse models? And that means something like refill or returnable packaging for your pet product lines. And our options are that you are already implementing, you are actively exploring, you're interested, but maybe the challenges seem really high, you're not interested, or the last option is just you don't understand the concept. So we'll keep that open for a little bit. And as you can probably tell from the poll, we're going to be talking about reuse models today, and talking about the whole waste hierarchy beyond just recycling. Just recycling, it's so important. A big shout out to our webinar sponsor, WPA. They've sponsored our whole line of webinars this year, and we're so thankful for their support. Okay, everyone take another few seconds to answer our poll. And if you're just joining now, welcome. We're so excited to have you. But yeah, I'm very curious to hear how open your business is to exploring reuse models. Okay, I see a few more polls coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and close it in right now. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see the results on screen, but we got kind of a nice little curve here. So some of you are already implementing it. 15% of you are implementing it. Awesome. I'm excited to have you join. But most of you, and I'm not surprised, 40% of you are interested, but the challenges seem high. If you are not interested or you don't understand the concept, we're excited to talk about it anyways today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. So let's get into it. In case you're new to PSC, this is a typical webinar. I'm going to start with some welcome and announcements. Then I will pass the mic off to our main speaker today, Searious Business. And then we'll hear a little bit from one of our members, Amcor, and we will have time for Q&A. And if you're new to PSC, this is us. We have a good time. You can see that photo of us here at Pet Summit earlier this year. We're a nonprofit. We're based here in Boulder, and we really envision the pet industry being a really super sustainable industry. So having a really positive environmental and social impacts, and we help companies do that. We have members all over the world, and there's a couple of different ways that we support our members. One is through individual company support. You could see us as consultants in that manner. But then the second is really leaning into the coalition part of our name and really engaging in collaborative activities. The gears over to the side are really how we see sustainability showing up in the pet industry. We talk a lot about ingredient sourcing, a lot about packaging, which is our focus today, and then responsible business. And this is all in the name of having a responsible industry transformation, because we do want to work towards that positive future for people, for planet, and the pets. So if you are curious to learn more about PSC or want to join us as a member, please reach out to us. You can drop a note in the chat here or find us online, and we would be happy to work with you. So about our webinar series, these are always free and open to the public, and we're really trying to choose topics that get at the matters that matter most in our industry. So today, of course, it's June 18th, already halfway through the year. Oh my gosh. We're going to be talking about designing for circularity, but we have 2 upcoming webinars in July that I'm also very excited about. We have a panel about data-driven sustainable ingredients, which I'm calling a show and tell of impact. We have some LCAs to go through. And then later in July, we have a webinar on third-party certifications and a conversation about if it's worth the investment. And we have a pretty stacked line of panelists for that one. So please join us for those upcoming webinars. And we do have individual webinar sponsorships available if you're interested. A few other announcements. PSC is going to be at Super Zoo coming up in August, and we have a happy hour that we would love to have you join us at. And of course, our big campaign, I kind of buried the lead there, is the Plastic Recovery July. We've partnered with Repurpose Global, and we have a whole other webinar on our YouTube channel really going into that initiative. But we as an industry are coming together to take trash out of the environment. Which I'm very, very excited. So help us reach that goal to recover nature-bound plastic. And again, if you want to learn more about that, please reach out. And then a couple of Zoom housekeeping notes. Please go ahead and use the chat at any time. You can say hello now if you want to let people know where you're calling from. The chat is really just kind of a casual back and forth, but if you do have a question that you would like us to address in the webinar with our speakers today, please use the Q&A feature. Also, I want everyone to find the little react button. When we're in this Zoom world, sometimes it can feel a little bit lonely. We see you there, but we don't see your faces. But if you use the react button and give a little heart, like I just did, that can show some love. So if you want to use the react button, please do. And I see you using it now. It brings me joy. Okay. I think I've covered my housekeeping. And so without further ado, let me kind of set the stage for our conversation about designing for circularity. So if you've been paying attention or following PSC along for the packaging ride, we talk a lot about transitioning to monomaterial. We talk a lot about improving the flexible plastic recovery stream. So that's conversations about store drop-off or curbside. And of course, like I just mentioned with our campaign, we are working towards recovering nature-bound waste. But in today's webinar, we're actually going to zoom out a little bit, and our speakers are going to talk about kind of what's possible beyond recyclability and beyond those points that I've just touched, and that's getting into the waste hierarchy. But then we're also going to zoom in specifically on the design phase and how to design for circularity. And so with that, I am excited to introduce Willemijn Peeters. She's the founder and CEO of Searious Business, which is a company helping brands to close the loop on plastics. She is honestly so passionate about this topic, about preventing plastics from ending up in the environment. She's been working in that space for 18 years, and she's proven that environmental responsibility and the business success go hand in hand, which is something we also really agree with here at PSC. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic off to Willemijn. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks a lot, Alison. Great to be here and happy to speak to all of the members of the Pet Sustainability Coalition. Really, the topic is on design for circularity, although you've asked me to focus a little bit more on reuse and refill as a novel angle. Having said that, we do a little bit more than that, but I'll try to balance it. And I know that Amcor is next after me, so I'll try to focus much more on reuse and refill. But I think really designing for circularity is at the heart of what companies should be focusing on, not just in packaging, but also on the content. It is about the products you bring to market, and that's where you can have the biggest influence, I think, as a brand or a retailer. So on the next slide, you can see what I'm going to talk about. It's the agenda, really short. I'll introduce Searious Business and what we do. Then a little bit more about sustainable packaging strategies for the people who just joined. So happy to see so many people join. And I'll then have, as part of the sustainable packaging strategies, focus a little bit more on reuse and refill systems. So really good to see in the poll that most people are aware of it and are curious to learn more. So I'll fill in a little bit more about why it's relevant. So why is it economically interesting? And also what works and what Searious Business has done in that regard. So sharing some examples on what you could do and how. So moving to the next slide, we'll focus a little bit more on Searious Business. What have we done? To the right, you see a few of our brands that we've been working for. Typically, what we do is help companies lower packaging and waste, OPEX. So really cutting on expenses by cutting plastic waste. And this typically is, if you look at an average portfolio, between 3 to 8%. So that is quite a lot, actually. Our focus is on how to help. So really providing strategic advice and help to operationalize the advice. So not just in a report, but helping to implement that change. We're very much looking at booking concrete results, so helping you to create a strong and sustainable future for your business. And as a mission-driven company, we try to prevent plastic from entering the environment and staying in the economy. So what does that mean? So why is this interesting for you? On the next slide, you can see what goals were set by the Pet Sustainability Coalition and which we really support wholeheartedly. We want to make sure that you can be compliant with legislation and to decrease costs. So that's the very first. I think that's what we try to achieve for all of our clients. We want to decrease plastic inefficiencies and waste, so also very much aligned there, and facilitate cross-value chain partnerships, because we see that you cannot create change by yourself, especially if you're looking more at effective reuse or effective recycling. You need different partners in the value chain to enable it. So great to see also different parts from the value chain being represented here in the webinar. And also switching to reuse and refill solutions is part of the goal set, and that's something we're very much in favor of because we can see economic potential to it too. On the next slide, you see a little bit more on the impact hierarchy. So if you're looking at getting to zero waste or zero plastic waste in particular, there's an impact hierarchy that is proven to be very effective when you first is looking at reduce. So can you take out any packaging that is unnecessary? So maybe take out extra headspace or any shrink wraps that are not necessary or labels. So really taking out excessive packaging. If you don't market it, you don't have to get it like recycled or returned to you. So that is the most effective strategy. Then as a second one, we always see in sustainable packaging moves that is really effective to try to see if you can reuse your packaging. So really avoiding single-use packaging altogether. It doesn't matter which material. Can you switch to reuse or refill solutions? And in that way, also have several touch points with your customers. So you encourage your customers to bring your own containers or have them participate in return and refill schemes. And that is key to reuse, to having more intervention points with your customers and thus build the relationship. That will avoid tons of plastic waste for sure. So before you get to the third one, those are the two that I really think we see also in impact measurements that can avoid a lot of costs and waste. So eventually, if you come to the third, so for all that you cannot reduce or reuse, can you make sure that your packaging also at the end of the reuse cycles is recyclable? So can it be made from recycled materials already? And is it recyclable in the current infrastructure that you're putting your marketing your products in? And for that, design guidelines are, of course, very helpful. In several regions, there's helpful instruments. And if none, we also try to help companies to abide by any upcoming legislation, help to get innovations done by converters like Amcor as well. One of the examples is to have a recyclable by design bags so that those can be designed for store drop-off recycling programs. And often these elements, if it's not for food or sensitive products, can be made from recycled content, which is a bit harder, of course, for pet food, but often is used in transport packaging if it's it doesn't have the contact with food. Then obviously the last one in the lot is renew. So can you use more sustainable materials from renewable resources? And these can be either plant-based materials or any biodegradable or compostable, at least reducing fossil fuel dependency, which in these times is extra relevant, I would say, with all these conflict areas popping up. So this is really a little bit more about the impact hierarchy. Also happy to receive questions on that in the Q&A if you want me to dive more into it specifically. For this webinar, I was asked to look more into reuse and refill and why it matters to you. So on the next slide, I'm showing a little bit more about our selection matrix that we often use to look at in a portfolio, so a packaging portfolio for customers. And we look at the items with the highest sales volumes, how does that align with the regulations and with the customer journey? And then we try to determine the right reduce, reuse, recycle, or renew strategy. And to put these things into perspective, we try to score these in terms of potential for the business, in terms of feasibility, in terms of impact on waste and CO2, but also the branding and differentiation. Of course, you need to be able to stand out. And last but definitely not least, in terms of potential cost reductions. And this is how we typically build that framework about improvements. And this is, of course, showing the high relevance to companies like yours to have improvements in that can really help to shift that needle both towards cost reductions, but also towards reducing waste. And in that sense, that's why I'm trying to start with reuse and refill, trying to give it a little bit more attention because it's proven to be much more effective than anything that comes after in terms of recycle. And it's not widely spread yet. So moving to the next step. Reuse and refill systems have proven to be beneficial for businesses and environment. Yet, of course, it is not a one-size-fits-all. It is really a solution that is suitable for certain applications. But pet food, luckily, is one of them. We've done quite some studies, but also in practice, and that show the economics of reuse systems. And we've seen with certain applications, it can reduce packaging waste up to 80%. So that is huge. It's really hard to get to those types of numbers if you're looking at recycling. So reducing the packaging waste is tremendous within reuse systems, but also it has high cost saving potentials. So it doesn't only reduce the cost for EPR fees and plastic taxes, but also helps you to become compliant with legislation. There's several national or statewide or even European legislation elements, and these are all covered by Scope 3 carbon emissions, but also by specific stipulations for reuse and refill. And all of this will help to facilitate sustainable consumption. So there's not just pressure from the regulatory side, but also from the side of the market. So your consumers are typically within the pet food industry, people that care about animals and the natural environment. So there we see a lot more demand for sustainable consumption in that area too. So diving more into the next slide, I want to show more about what works. So within refill, specifically for pet food industry, within reuse and refill, we typically work with a model to the right. So there's different reuse and refill models, and not all of them are suited for every types of solutions that I said, like for every product, there could be an optimum solution. But it's not a one size fits all. So looking at the products in this case, we're looking at what kind of packaging would be ideal, like for which category, what kind of model, like what would the design look like, what kind of material do you need to use. So this is really on the packaging side. But there's different models on reuse and refill. So it really is a matter of trying to make that match with the current market demand and that what is upcoming. So if you're looking at the systems part, you need to determine if it's going to be a reuse or a refill system. So for that all has different elements. So for one, you will have to go to the store. The other one brings it at home, and these need different technologies. So for some, you would need dispensers. For others, not. Some require differences at the converting side, and the other ones they don't like. Yeah, you don't need any changes to be made at the brand level. So these all are different. But it always includes some form of traceability to make sure that packaging is effectively reusable and being reused. That also enables efficient reverse logistics. So you need a clear parameters for transport, for cleaning, and for hygiene. So all of these parameters need to be met. Otherwise, your system is going to be too expensive or inefficient. So making sure these parameters are set is very important for both for the packaging side, but also for the way the system is built. And then the third element where you need to look at for reuse and refill systems is behavioral change. Because if you have the perfect system and the perfect packaging, that doesn't mean your reuse or refill system will fly. You need customers to buy into it. So there needs to be, we always say, you need people to get involved with their hearts, their minds, their money, and their time. So you need to have high uptake and high return rates. And there's clear interventions you can do that tick those boxes in order to come to the heart of it all, to get a cost-effective reuse model that saves costs and help you to be in compliant. So to the left-hand side, we made a short list of what we think has the highest potential for the pet food industry, which in this case is refill. So there's two options that we see huge promise for the members of the Pet Sustainability Coalition, which is the first one is in-store, so have an interoperable concept. So that means it's not just for one brand, it is for several. Good thing you're a coalition, so you could maybe team up with other members and you can have multi-brand refill stations. This means that it is a really novel technologies with high traceability, and it has a no-waste solution for both the front and the back end. That means that if you have to refill, it's not just being refilled in single-use packaging, that's not creating any value or reduction in waste, but also like the back end needs to be regulated really well. So all of those will have a reusable solution, and it would be suitable for dry foods and treats. The second part is even simpler because it's online. It would work with a subscription model, which in the pet food could be really beneficial for those who haven't used that before, but I think most of you have. You can combine it with home delivery and pickup, so having pickup of the used used packaging before, and then when you deliver the new one, you can make that switch. And it's also suitable for bulk at home. So then you just have one bulk container at home and people refill it at home. So there's different models in that as well, but those have, for our sense, the most potential. And this is proven to work. Let me show you in the next slide some examples of what we've done in this space for companies in the pet food industry. So what we've helped Nestlé with Purina is helping to set up refill dispensing through interactive capsules. And they also help to give alerts to the logistics managers when they're running out of stock. So you also have optimized refilling in store, but also in the warehouses. And it has easy weighing, and it is all connected to a loyalty app. So just thinking about the behavioral change again, this is really feeding into binding your customers and making sure that you go on a customer journey that is more than just one touch point. You can have returning purchases quite easily with this reuse system. We've done supported a 4-month trial that was rolled out throughout Switzerland now. So that is quite effective. Mars has done several brands, so with 3 different brands and available in Carrefour in France, where France is quite at the forefront of having legislation that is pushing for refill in store. And also there, the communication and the link to the customer loyalty program was made. I'm sharing a few more examples with you. I'm going a bit quick, but if you have any questions on it, you can, of course, ask in a Q&A. Some more examples are what Petco Care did with 100 stores participating throughout US, and that showed up to 40% savings per bag. So that is huge. The other one is in the UK. It's an online environment, so it is an online e-commerce player, and it had home delivery. It would have, like you see in here an example, you would have the return of the packaging upon the next delivery, and that works really well because all of these packaging items are optimized for food and for hygiene and cleaning, and it's all in a standardized uniform solution. Yet people choose online, so you still have the brand visual and identity there. Vraco is another party in France that have automated dispensing, and the thing that is unique there is this is an outside solution, so outside of the store, and it fits 3 products, so and you can have up to 2.5 tons in there, so that's quite big. Then moving to the next slide. Just wanted to stress that yeah, reuse and refill is not a one-off solution. It's not a simple trade for one material replacement for the other. And it involves, like I said, a few different elements. Yet reuse does add up. And we see that not just in practice, but also from the impact measurements, that there is huge potential there in cost savings and in reducing waste. That's how I also want to stress that, for instance, if you are having, I'm just making the analogy, if you're struggling with your finances, you always ask an accountant for help. The same goes for reuse and refill. If you don't know how to do it, please do get dedicated support, because there's experts out there like us that help you work on refill solutions, and that can make you help you set it up in a way that is economically viable for your business and actually a business opportunity. And that's what we do. We look at identifying the opportunities for specific brands and have synergies in the market. So maybe work together with others in the value chain, but maybe also with your peers. We help you to develop an optimized design for refill. So looking at the packaging, the infrastructure, but also your partners, helping to set up the business case. So that is, of course, important to get all your internal stakeholders involved, making sure that it is going to be viable, showing how the materials run through the value chain and how the money flows. So having a cost benefit analysis in, but also making sure that the environmental impact is positive. So you can link that again to your company's targets. And then, of course, helping you to support when you're piloting and scaling up, because it's not just about the pilot, it's really about scaling it up and making sure that is going to be beneficial to your company. So my stress would be to really get that dedicated support. And I have one last slide on the next one, showing that if you have any doubts, make sure you check your legal requirements. There's targets in the European, but also international legislation. There's also, apart from that, huge opportunities through refill. Like customers are actively asking for this. It will help you stand out on the shelf. It will help you reduce costs. So please do get the right support and make sure it is going to generate income for you. We can find the right solutions and systems and help you to get the right behavior change you needed and the right partners. So happy to answer any questions on this in the Q&A, and also looking forward to speaking more. Thanks a lot.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I think one of my favorite parts of your presentation is the little diagram with the products and the systems and behaviors. And I think you said that behavior includes hearts, minds, money, and time. Did I get that right?
Correct. Yeah, you got it.
So I just love how all of these things have to happen to really create change, but that also it's kind of like we can do that. We have those three things and there are techniques to make it happen. So thank you so much. I'm going to have you come back for the Q&A, but next I will invite Sarah Paleg to come on camera. She is the Director of Sustainability for Flexible Packaging at Amcor, which is a packaging solutions producer. She has a PhD in chemical engineering and honestly just a ton of experience with recycling and circularity. So I'm very, very excited to hear Sarah's take on the waste hierarchy. So I will stop sharing my screen and the floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Allison, and a lovely introduction. Is my video coming up for folks?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So excited to kind of blanket around some of these reuse options today. I think Willemijn did an excellent job of introducing the waste hierarchy with a strong focus on that reuse portion. And folks are probably familiar with the recyclable options that Amcor brings to the market. So we're going to touch briefly on sort of how our work fits and our offerings fit into the waste hierarchy. And then also talk a bit about the work that Amcor is doing to continue to grow film circularity. To expand film circularity and kind of its success in the system. So first, I think, again, from other webinars and maybe familiar with our products in the market, folks might be familiar with the offerings that we bring to market for recyclable options for pet food packaging. Primarily, our major offering is our Amprima offering, which is a recyclable film bag or pouch, right, a recyclable plastic format. Willemijn reference kind of store drop-off. So typically in the United States, this would not be these types of formats would not be accepted in a curbside bin, but they can be taken to store drop-off or depot collection sites. And some recent research from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition that was just released actually showed that over 70% of consumers have access to a store drop-off site within 3 miles of their home. So this starts to answer the question for us about how do consumers engage with store drop-off and what sort of access do they have, and starts to paint an optimistic picture of kind of where we're operating from today and how we can continue to grow access and ease of access to that recycling opportunity. The other opportunity that fits into this recyclable bucket would be a fiber-based package. For us, we would call that AmFiber. And this is sort of an emerging opportunity to make a fiber-based package with barrier properties. So something that's a bit newer, but if you're interested, of course, please reach out. We'd love to discuss. I also would want to highlight that while this fits really well into the recyclable part of the waste hierarchy that Willemijn introduced to us, it also sort of touches on that reduce part as well, right? Depending on what kind of format a product is in today, moving to a film or flexible based packaging might be itself a great opportunity to reduce the amount of packaging, especially if it's currently in a rigid format. So it sort of offers both of those opportunities in the waste hierarchy. In addition, we work a lot with how to bring recycled content into our packages across all of the segments that we supply. Folks here are probably familiar that the introduction of recycled content in pet packaging can be a bit more complicated because of pet sensitivity to organoleptics. And so when we think about recycled content, we think about two potential buckets of sourcing for recycled content. The first would be mechanically recycled content. If you aren't familiar with that word, then you're probably familiar with mechanically recycled content. That's something that's coming from material that's collected from consumers, and then I guess in its most simplest form, sort of ground up and melted back into a plastic resin. And we've shown in our work that we've achieved third-party certification of up to 30% recycled content using mechanical PCR, which stands for post-consumer recycled content in large bag formats. So excited to continue to drive innovation in that sphere, especially in the pet space, which again, with that difficulty with the organoleptics can require a lot of innovation, precision, carefulness with our sourcing and with quality control. So excited to be able to offer that to the market. And then the second bucket is advanced recycling. I think we don't have enough time to really go into the specifics here, but it offers an opportunity to bring in recycled content with no organoleptic concerns and an opportunity to reach a much higher percent of recycled content in a flexible package. So where I wanted to spend a bit more of my time before we transition into Q&A was around what is Amcor doing to continue to drive film circularity, right? It's excellent to talk about recyclability. It's excellent to talk about recycled content, but where we really want to drive the industry towards is an opportunity to enable ease of recyclability, scale up the amount of recycling of these packages that is happening. And so what are we doing to do that? I saw a question that said, I can only see the speaker, not the slides. That's because I don't have slides. Just sort of adding in a bit of information before we jump to Q&A. So talking about what Amcor is doing in the space, I think about our engagement in sort of three different buckets. The first would be advocacy. So where are we engaging with the industry, with governments to drive good regulation and legislation that continues to drive and enable these circular systems? The second would be, where are we working to define strong industry standards that enable the kind of the consistency that's needed to drive these systems forward? It's sort of a callback to Willemijn's mention of what's the opportunity from interoperability. So if we can define really strong industry standards around recyclability, we unlock additional opportunity for recyclers because they know what they're getting. They know they're getting a higher quality of film. And then the third bucket would be, where are we working to continue to develop and expand infrastructure? So we are very active in all three of these spaces, but just to highlight kind of examples from each of these buckets. The first was the advocacy bucket. So of course, we are very active with our trade organizations and nonprofit partners in advocacy, particularly when we think about EPR or extended producer responsibility. A lot of our work is around advocating for legislation that is consistent with the Consumer Goods Forum's EPR key principles. So this is an organization that has done a lot of work to invest in showing what good EPR looks like, and good in the sense that it's going to really create an opportunity to scale up circularity for all packaging, but especially for plastics and film. And one organization that we're particularly proud to be a part of is the EPR Leadership Forum. So that's a group of almost exclusively CPG companies, so large companies like Mars, Mondelez, Coca-Cola, Walmart, and Amcor is the only non-brand or retailer in that group. So really stepping up to be at that table along with our customers, and investing and advocating at the state level for great EPR bills that, again, really enable these systems. So submitting testimony letters of support in states that are considering EPR, educating legislators directly who are thinking about how to vote on upcoming votes, and really being on the ground, putting resources on the ground in these states to try to advocate, again, for these good systems, harmonized systems that are going to help the industry. The second is around defining industry standards. Again, Willemijn sort of referenced this. She talked about how can we have good design guidance. And an example of where Amcor is active here is being really involved with the Association of Plastic Recyclers. So APR helps set the definition and the testing protocols for what a recyclable film package looks like. And Amcor has really been at the forefront of in terms of helping define what that testing methodology looks like. So bringing our expertise to the industry to try to raise the bar and set a good standard for the industry. The last is the infrastructure piece. So if the first two pieces are sort of, we're talking the talk, I think the last piece is how are we really walking the walk? So how are we really investing with organizations that are building concrete assets on the ground to expand film circularity? So there's three organizations that we're involved in that are really active in the US and particularly in California, in part because California has set really high expectations with their EPR bill for circularity and recycling of all products. So Delterra and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste are organizations that already have great expertise in this area, who are really scaling up focused efforts around film circularity in California. But the one I wanted to talk a bit more about today is the Recycling Partnership and their group that is really focused on this film work and particularly in California. So it's the Film and Flexibility Recycling Coalition. It's a group of brands, converters, folks up and down the industry, up and down the value chain, I should say, who are bringing together funds to invest in California around film circularity. So more concretely, they are partnering with recycling facilities to expand sortation of film to be able to try to pull out film, show that we can pull out film packaging from recycling streams to collect, to send to recyclers and to end markets. And this group is also partnering with and building expansion of end markets for film packaging. So maybe a bit of industry term, but we talk about end markets being who's the group that's really using the post-consumer film and flexible packaging to convert into new products, and how do we grow the demand for that film to kind of send the signal up the value chain that collecting this material is really important for folks that are actually using it. So I think I'll pause there to try to get us back to the Q&A, which I think is sort of the heart of the discussion, but hopefully give a bit of a good overview of sort of other options for how to contribute to film circularity, especially through PET, and where we hope to take this industry in terms of expanding the circularity for film packaging.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I picked up the list of 3 that Willemijn said with the products, the systems, and the behavior. And then you also came with an awesome list of 3. You have advocacy, defining industry standards, and infrastructure. And I think that, I mean, there's so much going on in the supply chains that we've built and the systems that we've built. And I think it's really helpful the way you've described basically how to make it better. Okay, so Willemijn, if you want to come back on camera as well, let's move into the Q&A portion. So if you are in the Q&A, you'll notice that both Amcor and Searious Business has some support answering questions in the background. So you might have a text written answer to your question if you've asked it. But there are a few that I want to say out loud and just kind of talk through as a group. But I guess while we're doing that, feel free to type in more questions. Let's start with a question about the impact hierarchy and just clarifying that it does go in order. So it's like there is a hierarchy and there's the better one at the top and the worst one at the bottom. And I guess the one at the bottom was called, why can I not pull it up? Renew.
Renew.
Can you talk a little bit about why that's at the bottom?
Yeah, well, if you don't put any materials on the market, you don't have to somehow retrieve it or make sure that it is being put in circularity. So the reduce one is obvious, right? With reuse, it's also already in the circulation. So whatever you are putting on the market is not just being a one-off. So you actually taking into account a loss rate, of course, but you will have a reduced impact of your packaging because it's reused several cycles. So that is also dramatically reducing the impact that packaging has on the market. There's been quite some assessments done on the impact of reusable packaging versus single use, and the more effective reuse is happening at scale, the better the environmental option, obviously. So the reuse is also really avoiding a lot of single use, so thus reducing the packaging costs and impacts. Then recycling, of course, you need to make sure, like also Sarah said, you need to make sure that it's being kept in circulation somehow. You have some losses, obviously, with recycling as well. So like I said, with reuse, you need to make sure that it comes back. The same goes for recycling. It needs to be put in the same bin or somehow not being littered. So making sure that it ends up in the right spot so you can effectively recycle it if it's made for recycling. So some packaging is still like a very multi-material, multi-layer packaging that is very hard to get the materials back at a high quality in a new application that makes sense. So recycling is then often a challenge. And the same goes for renew. If you're looking at other materials, and you're just making sure that it is renewable, it is still draining single-use material sources, and the impact could actually be negative versus just using plastics or just using something else. So it is really a matter of comparing different materials and making sure that the one you choose is not causing another detrimental effect. So yeah, sure. Maybe plastic is just, it's very lightweight, it's very it's very effective also in terms of barrier. So paper packaging is often mentioned, but for pet food is often oily or greasy. And then paper is not such a good solution because it doesn't have that moist or grease barrier in itself. You would need a combination of materials. And then that, of course, obviously affects recyclability. I hope that explained it enough.
Yeah, well, and honestly, that makes me really glad that Sarah is here, because we do have a lot of questions in the chat. People seem very interested in your fiber solution. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how you are tackling some of those things that Willemijn just mentioned with the barriers and if it's recyclable? There seems to be a lot of interest in that product.
Yeah, and I'll invite Jacob to come on camera if he's interested in kind of contributing here. But I think when we look to Europe, we see sort of an indication that there's quite a bit of interest in paperization. So Amcor has been investing quite a bit in this area. Willemijn previewed the challenges, right? The challenge is barrier, and we have quite a bit of innovation to bring to the space in terms of offering a fiber-based package with barrier that is recyclable in the paper stream, so it can be recycled along with paper. And just for folks that might not have sort of touched these different kinds of materials, there are paper with plastic combinations that are not recyclable in the paper stream. If you think about some kinds of sort of frozen food, right? Something with like a waxy coating or kind of a heavier plastic coating. Just because it looks like paper doesn't mean that it's recyclable in the paper stream. So where we're focused, our work is on paper-based film packaging that would be recyclable in the paper stream, while still offering some of those barrier properties. I'm sure Jacob would want me to say that.
Yeah, well, welcome surprise guest Jacob, who thought he could just lurk in the background, but now he's on camera. Welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thank
Jacob.
you.
Get away.
Yeah, no, everybody hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, I think the one thing I really want to harp on here is we're really in the infancy stage here in the pet market with some of this fiber-based packaging. So really working together, collaborating on kind of where all of our glide paths are going is very important. You know, it's very innovative, but innovation has to start somewhere. So we're basically we call it AmFiber 1. Let's get to AmFiber 10 together and kind of just really develop that path. So.
Okay. Thank you for popping on. Jacob is also with Amcor, in case that wasn't clear. So a similar question. I wanted to talk about the trade-offs of the reusable and refillable format. So Willemijn, can you talk about shelf life and freshness and any considerations there for the models that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I think with reuse and refill, the fact that you are having a packaging format that it will be reused several times and thus having a less impact on the environment also enables you to have more features and maybe a bit sturdier packaging, because it will have to be able to resist several rounds. So this actually enables you to have really solid barriers in, and making sure that you can have that testing again with brands to ensure that it's really ensuring safety and hygiene. The handling in dispensing systems has also improved a lot since the 90s, when refill stations may have been a bit more prominent in the market than now. So there's a lot of drip and spill-free dispensing machines or bulk machines out there that really help to ensure that quality and hygiene, which of course is really important. Same goes for that is also a part of that is counter theft or just counterfeit. So making sure that is really the brand that is in there because of the high traceability on reusable packaging. The further there's a clear cleaning instructions. So there's working groups and standardization groups on the cleaning processes particularly. So we work a lot together with PR3, which is a standardization institute that helps reuse players to work according to the same guidelines and principles. So making sure that if you clean it, then it's really 100% clean, and there's no issues in terms of liabilities or moist or anything else growing in there. So making sure it is just as clean again as a virgin material. So I would think that is one of the assets. Also the high traceability, you know what's been in the pack before and where it's been and how often it's been in rotation. So I think it has a lot of assets above like in favor of single use.
So I shop at a bulk store here in Boulder called Nude Foods. And so I think a lot of it from the consumer perspective, that it's like, okay, I understand the containers that I get as a customer. But what I've never quite understood is like, how does the food get to those bulk containers? Could you talk a little bit about like the packaging before the consumers? Like how does it arrive in those refill stations?
Of course, it really depends on the volumes, of course. So what kind of volumes and what kind of product would you be? Would it be treats or would it be really the bulkier part? But there's industry solutions that are perfectly suitable to handle huge volumes. So you have the big silos, but you have mini silos, you have the intermediate bulk containers, and these can all be used as reusables, which they are oftentimes for the bulk solutions. So this is something that you don't see in the store, but it's being handled at the back end. And when done effectively, of course, it's going to be in a reuse solution. So you don't need any bag in boxes or anything else. It is really in the intermediate bulk containers, and there's flexible intermediate bulk containers that are reusable as well. So we see those solutions coming into place more and more. Even so, in the European Union, even there's going to be mandatory targets on intermediate bulk containers and flexible intermediate bulk containers that have up to 100% reuse targets, because it's yeah, because there's no touch points with the consumers, it's quite easy to get them in a dedicated closed loop reuse system. So you'll see that is popping up more and more, like is the case with pallets already. It's not such as rocket science.
Yeah. So I think there's a question here that says, when considering our packaging options, how can we get a clear measurement on our impact when considering every step of our packaging? And I think that's so important because, again, like it's the whole life cycle, it's the whole system that is changing. So I'd actually love to hear from both of you, maybe starting with Sarah and then Willemijn, just like what data do you need to really be able to say like one type of packaging is a better or worse impact than another?
Yeah, so I think Willemijn alluded to this a bit in her presentation, but we can expand, right? So we typically look at this through the lens of a life cycle assessment. It's kind of a generic phrase, but there's a whole science and body of work behind this to define how do we compare products, any product, including packaging, on a number of different metrics. And I will say it's the complexity of the sustainability topic when considering circularity versus sort of that climate greenhouse gas impact, right? That's really different to bring those two concepts onto the same scale, and something that comes up a lot, especially in flexible packaging, because while there's an important and challenge around the circularity and kind of enabling those systems, often it is a very effective solution in terms of its climate impact and greenhouse gases, right? We talked about kind of how it's a very lightweight solution, and that is both in terms of the amount of plastic used. It also flows through the whole supply chain in terms of reduced weight and transport. Life cycle assessments will try to go after this, right? So you'll look at what is the material being used, what is the greenhouse gas and other, so I started with greenhouse gas, but what are the impacts of that material on a number of different dimensions, whether that's greenhouse gas, plastic use, water use, a number of different dimensions. So what's the material being used? How is it transported through the supply chain? And then how many times will that be used in its life cycle? So it sort of opens up the door for discussion, but Willemijn, what else is on your mind for this?
Yeah.
No, I think you got it spot on. I think the life cycle assessment does give you good direction. Having said that, you don't need to do like a very 20-page report with an LCA on one type of packaging. I would think you can already get a good indication on what would be a suitable solution if you look at the different types and have a high over estimate. We run a lot of life cycle assessments, but also give some guidelines on, in general, if it's this much heavier or this much like this many combinations, then it doesn't make sense. So there's a couple of like guidelines that you can abide by, and I think Sarah also highlighted a few consortia which are really trying to get to guidelines and helping you determine if something is good or not. But if you really want to know, yeah, then ask because there's good solutions out there. Having said that, there are sometimes life cycle assessments circulating or that are quite biased. So it's like one company would say like our solution is best because we ran an LCA and we have different assumptions than the rest of the world, and that's how ours is better. So making sure that you do it by an independent player that you can rely on for your optimum solution.
And I think I saw a question that was also sort of, how do we do this, right? It's nice to know that it exists, but how do we do it? The answer is probably either of us, right? Willemijn, I'm sure that's probably a service you offer with your clients. And then for Amcor, when we are engaging with customers who are considering what kind of more sustainable option package to bring to market, we have our own LCA tool in-house that we will often use to support customers in that decision.
Correct.
That's I think about data all the time, and it's like if everybody needed like the specific measurement of a very specific type of packaging in a system and they needed it to be perfect, like we would spend all of our time measuring and less time just like making decisions. So I appreciate the point about like at a certain point there are just like things that we know. I guess like that's a decision of like how specific do you need the data to be. You don't have to answer that, it's just on my mind all the time.
You have like a couple of rules of thumb that you can use, and happy to, if there's any people struggling, like as Sarah said, this is part of our work, so happy to help.
Great. Well, we are almost at the end of our time. There's a lot of good questions. A lot of them have been answered in the chat. And if people have more questions, feel free to send them my way or find PSC, and we'll make sure to get those answered because this was a great discussion. But before we close, I wanted to give each of you maybe a minute or two to just leave the audience with your final thoughts and what you would like them to take away from this conversation. Willemijn, do you want to go first?
It can be short. Reuse adds up. Find out more and then contact us.
Okay, very short, less than a minute, less than 10 seconds. Sarah.
Yeah, you went so fast, I didn't even have time to think about it. I think for us, give yourself grace that this topic is complicated, right? We threw at you a bunch of different possible formats to use, a bunch of possible different materials to use, and there's not a simple answer that you're missing. This is it's a complicated subject that's evolving as we learn more about what's possible for systems of circularity, as we learn more about the science. So that's why Willemijn and I have jobs to help drive clarity in these fields. But I think the magic happens in the one-on-one conversations where we can talk about what works best for your format, what works best for the needs of your products and the needs of your customers.
Great. I also would like to leave the audience with a message. One of you said to team up with other members and other companies, and I think that circularity is not something that one company can accomplish. So let's work together. So thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom. I learned a lot from this, and I know the audience did too from what I'm seeing in the chat. So thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Great, thank you too.